I believe reviews can change the world, spread love, joy, and peace. Let's talk about Michael.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing or debating the movie Michael. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is, movie recommendation time. Even though I went on a Jennifer Lopez binge, there was actually a movie that did star Jennifer Lopez this weekend, and the movie is called The Negotiator. Came out in 1998, starring Samuel Jackson and Kevin Spacey. It was a hostage situation movie where a police officer was pretty much being framed for a crime he didn't commit. So then he wasn't, no, sorry, he wasn't a police officer, he was a negotiator, but he works within the police force, but his main role was a negotiator. And obviously, when he was framed for a crime that he didn't commit, he ended up being in a hostage situation where now Kevin Spacey's character is the one that's negotiating with him. And then throughout the movie, he's trying to prove his innocence. And it gets really techie from there. I would actually recommend this film because I wouldn't say it's a film where off rip you'll know who's guilty or who's not. I would definitely say it brings the excitement, like it brings that excite factor from trying to figure out who is who, as well as the performances. The performances also are amazing. I just have a thing for like these early, like the 90 films. You know what I'm saying? Especially, I don't know what it is. It's just these films just feel different from, because this is action crime genre. So these action crime genres from the 90s just feel different from the ones that we see now. There's more depth in the storytelling in comparison to now. I feel like now it's very linear and basic, whereas, well, of course, not all of them, but I'd say the majority of them in comparison to films of back in the day, is definitely worth the watch.
It does seem a little bit like mid 90s to early 2000s was kind of the time when you would put just 2 or 3 really high caliber actors in a room and have them act out a really tight script. Reminds me a little bit about Phone Booth, right? Like that's kind of similar, where in hindsight you recognize the entire cast and it's just people acting in a room for an hour. That's kind of what it seems to be like. And clearly movies like that are still being made, but not as much, it seems. And they're certainly not the kinds of movies that get a lot of attention.
Yeah, I'd definitely say the highlight of this is definitely the chemistry between Samuel L. Jackson's character and Kevin Spacey's character. They definitely do work in unison. The way that they bounce off each other. First, they kind of like start off as enemies, and then obviously, I'm not no spoilers. You'll see how their relationship progresses. But I just feel like you don't really see that quality of a performance nowadays as frequent. I can't really speak on the 90s. I was born in 1997, but from watching a lot of the 90 movies in comparison to now, it's like, I don't know, the performances are just way better, especially when they're working with
Yeah.
another actor.
They're clearly good actors in Hollywood right now, right? I mean, just this year we've done a bunch of dramas that are just carried by 1 or 2 really strong actors. Like Marty Supreme would be an example of this, right? That would be like in that category. But I think it has something to do with like the box office, where in the 90s you could just make a moderately budgeted drama with a couple of good actors and a strong script, and it would make money. I don't know if this movie made money or not, but it seems that was a more of a winning strategy back then, and today it's basically guaranteed to lose money. And maybe that's why you see less of it. And like and when you do see it, like my standard example is like Marriage Story, which is like Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver talk through their divorce, right? Like they're married and their relationship has failed and they're talking out and then they get divorced or something. I haven't seen the movie, but that's like the kind of movie that they make in between the Avengers movies and nobody goes to see them, right? You know what I mean? Like it seems to be like a casualty of just what works at the box office is just different than it was in the 90s. But that also means that the 90s gave us a lot of movies like this. And like going into 2000s, right? You can get them from any decade, but for some reason, like late 90s, early 2000s, there were just a lot of those in that time.
I can agree with that.
All right, so my recommendation this week is The Adjustment Bureau. So The Adjustment Bureau is a 2011 science fiction romantic thriller movie. The story is essentially there's this congressman who loses an election and he has like this crisis of faith essentially in the bathroom, and he runs into this woman who inspires him to give politics another shot, and that puts him on a trajectory, and he loses her phone number, and then for the next year he tries to find her again, and circumstances always conspire that mean he narrowly misses her. And it turns out that there's this shadowy organization that can see the future, and they have like a master plan of what is supposed to happen. That plan requires that he becomes president at some point in the future, but he doesn't meet her again because that's the trajectory they need him on. And so as he starts pushing against his artificial fate and this bureau starts making mistakes, he starts realizing what's going on, and he starts pushing back against it and fighting it, and essentially starts trying to circumvent it. there's like a showdown between them where basically they try to convince him that this is for his own good if he doesn't rebel against the plan. And that story kind of grows from there, but that's kind of the setup. It's one of those science fiction movies that are based on a short story. This one is by Philip K. Dick, and that's the same author that wrote the basis for Paycheck, which we talked about like a year ago, also Blade Runner and a few others. And like in the early to mid 2000s, they really mined all the short stories that Philip K. Dick wrote. And this is kind of one of them. And one of the reasons why I'm recommending this one is a lot of these small to medium-sized sci-fi movies have the problem where they have a first act that kind of explores this out there premise, and then the rest of the movie devolves into just chases and action, and like especially generic action. And then it kind of stops being about the thing that it sold you on. Conventional wisdom says, well, you have to do this, otherwise audiences will reject it. And I think that's completely wrong. And a lot of movies, including things like Paycheck, like we talked about that in our review of that, get ruined because you can turn it off at the halfway point because nothing interesting happens after that. Adjustment Bureau is a little bit different. If you watch the trailer and the poster, it looks like it's half an hour of sci-fi exposition and then a bunch of running. And while that happens, it bucks the trend of being about nothing in the second half. It actually has a story that actually has a conclusion. The movie itself is not the greatest sci-fi movie you've ever seen, but it kind of stands out by actually having a plot in the second half, which a lot of these movies don't. Basically, I watched it for completeness because it was one of those where the premise looked kind of interesting, but I didn't want to waste another 2 hours on that kind of movie. And after years and years of putting it off, I actually watched it expecting not a lot. But then I was in the second half, and there was still story going on and character stuff and stuff like that just exceeded my expectations. It's just what I'm saying. So if you kind of skip movies like that because of kind of the generic action in the end, this one is a little bit different. It's a little bit better.
Was there a good ending?
The ending is okay, but it has one, is the point, right? Like it's not like this revelation of storytelling, but it does have an ending that has something to do with the beginning, and that's good. Like that's above average.
I feel like there has not been a movie yet. Maybe there has, and I just forgot. But there has not been a movie yet for you where it's had a good ending.
Oh, there absolutely are good movies with good endings
that we've spoken about.
Yeah, but like it's really rare that a movie doesn't fall apart in the end, because for whatever reason, like in my view, like if I was a screenwriter, and maybe this is easy to say if you never have to actually do this, but it seems to me like you should start with the ending and then work backwards to see, okay, how can we get to this point? Because to me, the ending is what holds the movie together, and that is kind of the last impression the audience has. It just seems to me like a screenplays would be stronger if you were working towards a very specific ending, and the movie is judged on that ending. Because like a lot of movies are kind of like, they either have a really intriguing beginning or they have some cool stuff here and there, but then the ending falls apart. I don't get why nobody seems to think that this is important. And kind of that is why, like, grading on that curve, the Adjustment Bureau is actually pretty good, just by not doing that. There definitely are movies with good endings, right? Like Marty Supreme is another example of this, like where the ending is exactly what it needs to be. That movie is built around building towards a very specific ending and a very specific character place. It just feels satisfying because once you get to that point, you see how it all led to this point. And this is not the only movie, like there's other movies too, but it's really rare that all pieces come together, right? Like we had a few movies this year where the ending was kind of intriguing, like Shelby Oaks was kind of like this, where the ending was the most interesting part. It's just, it didn't have anything to do with the 80 minutes before that. And that is why I didn't like the movie overall. So there actually are interesting and good endings. But the problem is, it's a very low hit rate. And if the ending is good, there's probably something that comes before it that kind of tanks the movie. Cloverfield is another example that has a very specific ending that is not generic at all. It's just a generic victory. It follows directly from the ideas and themes of the movie, and everything that happens in the movie builds towards that conclusion. You can absolutely find them. Like, I'm not saying like nobody ever does this. It's more like, why is this not normal? Why is this not why is this not like 80% of movies?
Okay. Looks like it's time for the main event. Daniel, can you please do your thing?
So Michael is a biopic about the early life of Michael Jackson, beginning with his childhood in the 60s, where he's the son of a steel worker and a housewife, and he has four brothers and 2 sisters, I think. That at least one is missing. I think there's another one, I'm not sure. But like, there's the Jackson 5, which is basically the 5 sons of the family are basically this band that range in age from, like, Michael is like 8 when he starts, and the oldest is maybe 15 or something like that. And the father is basically drilling them to be this band because that is, in his view, their one big chance of making it. And in the course of that, it is discovered that Michael is the one with the talent. And he initially kind of uplifts the band and then goes on his own journey and starts a solo career, and then finally becomes the biggest music artist to have ever worked, which I think, as far as I know, he still holds that record 40 years later. I'm not a music guy at all. You can chase me with music. It's not my, it's 0% of my life. But even I know what a musical prodigy Michael Jackson was. And this essentially covers the parts of his life from him being in the Jackson 5 as a 10-year-old all the way up to his big tour in which he breaks from the family completely. And from that point on, has his solo career in, I think, 1988. So what did we think of Michael?
I will say that the musical performances, is that the right term to use when it comes to like watching music scenes in a film?
I think the term is concert movie, where the movie is built around these musical performances, right? Which this basically is, right? It's also a jukebox musical because it's basically held together by Michael Jackson performing some of his greatest hits, including things like Thriller and Bad and a few others. Those are probably the terms.
When it comes to the musical performances that I saw in this movie, which were the highlight for me, probably the first time I've ever proper got jiggy in a cinema before and literally singing. I wouldn't say word for word because I don't know all the lyrics, but I know most of it. So I had a fun experience. However, I don't want to say it was a problem for me, but I will say it's definitely something which I didn't want them to go this route in terms of Michael seemed very angelic, borderline angelic in this biopic, which kind of made it a bit hard. No, I wouldn't say it made it hard to resonate with, but I just kind of wanted to see more behind the scenes stuff of what was going on, because we did see the backstories of, certain music videos or just certain events in his life where I was like, okay, I didn't know that. That being said, we didn't see much of it. It felt like his life was too big to be put in 2 hours and 7 minutes because it did sometimes feel rushed. And like I said, there were times where it did feel angelic. It was very hard to see Michael's flaws. And I know for a fact Michael has flaws because he's not Jesus. So I was kind of, I don't want to use the word disappointed, but kind of let down in that aspect of things because I did want to see a bit more of his story and a bit more of like his flaws. Because even in society, Michael Jackson he's a mega star. And like his interviews and stuff, it would seem very angelic, like he was someone that would do no wrong. With this film, they didn't show, the controversies, which personally for me, I don't have a serious issue with. But if they weren't going to do that, they should have done something else to compensate for that, which is like show a bit like more of his flaws. Because like I said, it felt like he was a bit too perfect in this film. So that would probably be my only problem with it. But besides that, this was a fun film, man. I'm going to go probably watch it again with my family. I wanted them to do Smooth Criminal, but then I realized obviously that's way down the timeline. So that's probably why we didn't get a lot of the performances that we want to see in this in the movie. And they did put performance emphasis when it comes to like length time, screen time on certain songs I didn't really want to see. But overall, I'd say I had a fun experience with this.
So I'm not a biopic guy, I'm not a music guy, and I'm not a Michael Jackson fan. So all of these things are things that put me to sleep. So this movie kind of had an uphill battle with me in multiple ways. But I gotta say, the way the music in this movie was produced and put into scene, I was into it by the end. It legitimately got to me a little bit, got me excited, and that does not usually happen. So I think that part of it works really well. And if you're just a Michael Jackson fan, you just want to see these big milestones, I think you absolutely get your money's worth, and that explains why it's already made over $200 million after the first weekend and is one of the best performing movies of this year, which is not a crowded field at all. I think outside of Scream and Project Hail Mary, nothing has made real money this year yet, as far as I'm aware. So it's not saying much to say this is one of the most successful movies of the year so far, but it is resonating with people, and I think it is resonating because of the music and because it kind of hits the high notes of the first half of Michael Jackson's life, which are kind of, I would say, the good years, probably. Like, we're going to get into that whole thing, but it seems to me like this is the feel-good stuff. These are the big successes. This is him emancipating himself from his family. That is him kind of becoming an independent artist that makes music on his own terms and finds success and is one of the most successful artists of all time. And that's pretty much all there is to this movie. And also the performance of Jaafar Jackson, who I think is his nephew. I'm no expert on Michael Jackson at all, but it seemed to like he really tried to get his mannerisms and his personality and his movements down. And I think that part of this movie really works. What doesn't work so much is just basic storytelling in many areas. So biopics are a little bit weird in that a real person's life doesn't really follow like a clean narrative structure, right? And if you impose one on it, you start taking a lot of liberties and you start forcing a lot of beats and archetypes and payoffs and whatever. And so if you just want to say, okay, this is what happened in this person's life, it's going to feel like just a series of events as opposed to a story. And that's kind of the nature of the beast. But everything that is not related to kind of the big performances, I think in this kind of follows a checklist process where they basically just include things, right? So the early plastic surgery, the abuse by the father, the yes in the Jackson 5, like all of these things are kind of things you know about Michael Jackson. And as somebody who doesn't know anything about music at all, those are things I knew. So it is quite basic, and the movie is also lacking any kind of conflict. So the only real antagonist is the father, and everybody else is on Michael's side, basically, and tells him how amazing he is and wants him to succeed, and there are no real obstacles to overcome. That does not seem like that is how it would have gone down in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I think that contributes to the movie feeling so sanitized and so superficial, I think, is that it doesn't feel like a real person's life. In that sense, it feels like somebody summarized the Wikipedia summary and then filmed that. That's kind of how it feels. Let's talk about it.
The first point I want to make is a point that kind of ties in with what you're saying. My point about them not showing his flaws much, and obviously your point about your point that you made in terms of like the errors, and there wasn't really like a realistic, not even realistic, but a true portrayal of what the errors were like. I feel like they could have gone hand in hand, because like, when I say flaws, I don't necessarily mean Michael's bad side. What was he like when he was bad? I mainly mean like, you know, in times of adversity or times of perseverance, times of hardship, right? So stuff like that, I wanted to see what like his story in those moments. And I feel like that could have been portrayed in different eras. Like you said, like you didn't believe some of the stuff that you're seeing with how the 60s, 70s, and 80s were. I remember you mentioned that point, especially in the office, where you're like, he was black, number one. So like I know for a fact there had to have been some backlash, some adversary, because like I said, he was a black guy living in the 80s, and it was hard for black people in the 80s and stuff like that. And we didn't really see that. We just saw everyone loved Michael Jackson, the superstar, which goes into my second point. Do you feel like that was intentional? Because you say you don't really know much about Michael, right? So what I've seen from Michael, from the interviews and the way people talk about him, it feels like everything that he does is superstarish, if that's not really a word, but literally, like even his interviews, it feels like, oh, this guy is like a superstar. Even at times when I'm watching, I'm like, this guy surely can't be like this. He has to be acting. Like the way that he talks, the way that he acts, no way this could be the true Michael. In reality, maybe that was really him, based especially with how the portrayal of the film, because even in the film I'm like, no way does Michael actually talk like that behind the scenes. Is this how he was actually talking? Is this the actual tone of his voice and the way that he was talking, the way that he was acting with his family? Is this how he actually was? Because this is how he was in public. So in terms of his portrayal kind of being like superficial, do you think that was intentional? Because that's generally the image he portrays. But I don't want to use superficial in a way. I don't want to use the word superficial, but like I said, it feels like everything he does is a performance, but not in a bad way. That's just the way Michael is.
He does say at one point he wants to be mysterious. He doesn't want to do interviews, and he wants to put as much distance between him and his fans as possible so that he has a certain aura around him. You're right that there is no real difference in terms of how he talks in public versus how he talks to his family. And I have no idea if that's realistic or not. But you're right, like there's no performance going on. There's no show being put on, right? And it seems to me like he would have been the kind of person who does that, right? Everything from how he dresses to how he speaks to acts and what he says in public and so on. It seemed to me like that would have been going on in some way. And there would have been some kind of switch between private Michael and public Michael in some way. And I didn't really get that at all. He just talks the same way, in the same inflection. He says the same things. He talks like, I don't know, like an oracle.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it.
I don't remember the exact scene now, but when I was watching it, there was like the scene where he's talking maybe to his agent, and the agent talks like a normal person, and Michael talks like he's quoting prophecy. right? Like, you know what I mean? Not like a normal. Like, I don't expect Michael Jackson to act or behave or speak like a normal person. I'm just saying, in the movie, he's always speaking like this, like in very high-minded, head in the sky, big ideas kind of thing. And I just don't buy it. I don't buy that he's always like that. I can buy that somebody is like that generally most of the time, but it's like there's no private Michael in this. Like when he's on the couch eating ice cream with his mom, watching old movies, he's still the same way. And that, to me, I don't know what the motive in this was. It does read a little bit like they're just trying to have a very simple and streamlined,
kind of like the legend approach.
yeah, like they want him to be a legend as opposed to a person. And normally, a biopic pulls back the curtain and shows what the person was really like. And here, that is the last thing people wanted to do.
But that's why a part of me feels like that might have been intentional, because it might have just been a thing where that's how Michael acted in his free time. Even when he was playing with the animals, I'm like, is this guy Jesus? Because it's getting to the point where, like I said, it felt like this guy was angelic. I do believe, I'm kind of in agreement with what you're saying, where it's like, he can't be like this 24/7. But then a small part of me is like,
maybe he is.
yeah, maybe he just is.
And honestly, I kind of watch a biopic to find out. If we have to scrutinize and question a movie like this, like at every level, and just figure out, okay, in what ways are they lying and how much, that kind of sucks the joy out of a biopic for me, or out of a movie. And that is kind of why I don't generally like to watch biopics, and that is generally why I'm very critical of historical movies, because I want to experience the thing they're depicting. It's never going to be perfect 100% accurate, but it's you can get a sense, right? You can get an authentic impression of what that person or that time or that place was like. Like with biopics, like biopics already don't do this very often, and this one seems to try to do the opposite.
Yeah. But if it was confirmed that this really was how he was like, would your opinion on the film change?
Well, if that's how it really was, then yeah, I'm not interested enough to do all the research and trying to track down like sources. But if like everybody who knew him in private said, yeah, that's just how he was, that's how he talked, some people talk like that, and he was one of them, then I said, okay, fair play, that's how it was. I'm just saying it feels artificial and it feels like a line. It feels like I'm being fed something. And that is kind of something that is generally the case with this movie, right? Like another aspect to this is, I mentioned how there's no conflict. Like the father is clearly an antagonist, right? But everybody else is on his side. Everybody instantly recognizes his genius and wants him to succeed. He never pushes back against anybody. You don't even have to bring up the fact that he was a black musician in the 70s. Just anybody in show business has to fight for everything. And he doesn't really have to fight for anything. Once he gets out of the reach of his father, it's smooth sailing after that, right? That black music producer in the beginning instantly recognizes that Michael is the only real talent in the family. That agent guy, the owner of the record label, everybody, right? Like it's not even like music producers or sponsors or anybody really tries to. Like I've seen a lot of commentary, like over the past couple of days, I've been reading a bunch of opinions from Michael Jackson fans and others just to get a sense of what people are saying. And one thing that you get over and over is, oh, he was a black artist who was exploited by old white men. It's not in this movie. Not once. Like the only one trying to exploit him is his father.
Yeah. And another thing I was a bit surprised about was that they didn't show the brothers' like reactions or feelings towards Michael wanting to go solo.
There are subtle reactions. Every time he starts to overshadow them, you can kind of see kind of the envy a little bit on their faces, but not to the point where it becomes a real conflict.
I don't think so. I think for me personally, the only time I could see some sort of reaction was when he announced that was, you know, the Jackson 5 tour was going to be their final tour, wherever I think it was in England when he was performing. And that's the only time where I saw kind of like a reaction to it.
That's definitely the strongest because he sprang it on everybody, right? And people were thinking there would be another 20 shows in that tour or whatever. But also like when they're the Jackson 5 and he starts overshadowing all of them, it basically becomes his show. There's like facial expressions on his brothers that kind of show that they don't quite like it.
I didn't see that, honestly.
I think it's there, but it doesn't rise to the level of real conflict. And then the only other real conflict that there is when MTV refuses to show his videos, even though he's already one of the biggest, musicians of his time, and MTV just doesn't run black artists. And then he goes with his agent to the owner of the record label, and he basically says, "I make this happen." Within minutes, the owner of the label has convinced the owner of MTV to do it. He basically says, within the next 10 minutes, I want Michael on MTV. Otherwise, we walk and we take Bruce Springsteen, and he names like 5 other artists that are huge with them, right? What's the conflict in this? Like, what's being overcome? He doesn't have to convince anybody. Like, there's no real struggle against anything. That's one of the reasons why I think this feels flimsy. And biopics often are like we don't get biopics about random people. We get biopics about people who have interesting stories, and they usually have interesting stories if they overcame adversity. And in this movie, there's minimal adversity. Like outside of the family, there isn't basically any.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to like the abuse allegations about all of that because that kind of has overshadowed Michael Jackson's legacy, but just as a story and about the rise of this incredible performer, what's the adversity that's being overcome? What is the struggle? What is the accomplishment by the end? He just is amazing at what he does, and he gets results accordingly. Like this is the most just world movie you've ever seen, where everybody gets everything they deserve just automatically, just because it's a law of nature. And it's really weird. Do you not want to make your protagonist even more noble? Unless this is really just the first half. And then we are basically setting him up to fail. And that is why all his early successes come so easily. If there's another movie that covers the second half of his life, and that is much darker and much more tragic, maybe this is like the contrast that we need for that to really hit home, maybe. But we're looking at this movie just by itself, and by itself it's a really lame story.
Yeah, my opinion still hasn't changed on it being a fun story, and I think that's mainly because of the performances. That being said, in terms of the story itself, a lot of the points that you've brought up and that I brought up as well is, I believe it's right. Also, like I always wanted to bring up was, I was also kind of disappointed that they didn't really go into Michael's psyche. Like they didn't really explore. Maybe they did explore it, but I just missed it. But I just didn't feel like they explored his psyche well enough. Like, of course, his dad was kind of like the vehicle to that. Like, for example, when Michael was talking to like animals and stuff, right? I thought they were going to do something with that where we might have understood, like they would have explored that side of him.
Before we go into that, I think I should get one more example of lack of conflict. I do wanna talk about what you just mentioned, but just before we go on, the gang scene where he basically from age 10 he's rich, right? Like he grows. Like I actually came across like a Reddit post that was like a high school picture after he moved to like when he was like 11 or 12, like from his Hollywood high school, like middle school. And it's like a funny picture because he's the only black kid in the entire class. Like it's kind of it's a bit like half the comments are, well, I was going to ask which one is Michael Jackson, but then I saw, yeah, it's clear who Michael Jackson is. But from most of his life, he grew up quite rich and quite privileged, right? And even before that, he came from a working class family from a like industrial town, right? Like I think his father worked in a steel mill or something, and they lived like within walking distance of the steel mill and all of that, right? His experience was not the hood. You know what I mean? Like that does not seem to have been his life. There's a scene or a sequence in the movie where there's like this massive gang war between the Bloods and the Crips, which I guess in the 80s was like the big thing. He feels solidarity with them, but it's not his world at all. Right? He looks like them, but he's not them in any way. But he just shows up like in their neighborhood and says, hey, let's dance. And let's just get along. And they kind of hammer out this dance routine over the course of an afternoon, and everybody loves him and everything is great. And I wasn't even sure if there were Bloods and Crips supposed to be together in that. I don't think so. I think he just showed up with one of them, and then the idea was the next day he would do it with the others. And then
no, both of them were in there.
Yeah, they were mixed in the crowd. Yeah. First of all, zero conflict in any of this. Secondly, his approach is really childlike, right? Which is kind, I guess, on point. Like that's in character. But it's basically just, hey, just hold hands and sing, and then we will realize how much we have in common. That is not why gang violence happens. Like that does not solve any of the underlying causes of why these gangs were forming, right? In that time and place. And the movie cuts away before he has to deliver. Notably, everybody loves him while and is starstruck while he's there, but we never see that he actually solved any problems. And maybe it's supposed to be obvious that he didn't, but just in the context of the movie and how everything comes easy to him otherwise, it seems to me like he's doing something that has to fail in the sense that the gang war will continue once he leaves. But we don't see this. And I don't think, unless I missed it, there's no acknowledgement in dialogue or anything that shows that he was well-meaning, but the world was just too complex or too messy for that to work. You know what I mean?
In his defense, though, when he shot one of his music videos called "They Don't Care About Us," when he went to Brazil, I think the government refused to let him shoot a video there. But the Brazilian gang, I don't know if they call themselves cartel, and I'm not sure if they refer to themselves as a cartel there as well, but the Brazilian gang that runs the neighborhood that he shot the video at literally said, middle finger to the government, you can shoot in our neighborhood. So for me, when it comes to like the whole point that you made, it seems like everything comes easy to him. there wasn't really much conflict when it comes to certain situations like with Bloods and Crips and stuff. I feel like that might just be how it was because he was Michael, where a lot of the times people will kind of like behave because he's Michael Jackson, like serious issues, like like, do you know what I'm saying? So the fact that he managed to go to Brazil and the government said you can't shoot there, but the local gang that runs that neighborhood said no, come here. Literally went against the government, said no, come here, we'll provide you protection against the government, you can shoot it. That's why I didn't necessarily have, like, at first I'll be like, Bloods and Crips just standing next to each other and we're not showing any sort of conflicts whatsoever. That being said, I said, okay, well, this is Michael Jackson. A lot of times people did kind of like act like this guy was God. So I think a lot of the times people were on their best behavior, even though there was a lot of ish going on. So that's why I necessarily didn't have an issue with the way that scene was portrayed.
Okay, but what happens when he leaves the next day?
True.
And the next, like, somebody loses his temper and shoots somebody from the other side, and then what happens? Do they say, but we had this really cool day with Michael Jackson, let's talk about this? Like, I don't believe it, right? So that's kind of the part that feels very, it's not just rushed, it's just left out completely. And I didn't know about this thing about the Brazilian gang, and that sounds like a much more interesting story.
But this happened way after the fact.
Okay, that happens after 88?
Yeah. I think this happened in the 2000s.
Okay, maybe they would put that in the second movie or whatever. But the way it's portrayed is that Michael Jackson in this movie fixes things, right? He sees problems and he fixes them, and he comes up with ingenious solutions that nobody else saw, right? Like usually when it comes to like coming up with the dance routine or the song or whatever. There was actually one fun line in this where he's in the pool and he says, "I'm waiting for inspiration from God, and if I don't like it, he can give it to Prince." That was a cool line. Remember which one?
Yeah.
So that was just a fun line, and I believe that somebody in that place would talk like that, right? So I totally believe that he can see kind of footage of the gang war, like in a black neighborhood, and say, "I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna fix it." I just don't believe that he can succeed.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, like, what, like, if the movie, like, first of all, the movie doesn't show him fail. Secondly, it doesn't make the point that he's too naive to do this. We just see his triumph of getting them all to dance together, and then scene's over, and we don't see what comes after that. So it's just a thing of what's the point of the scene, like in the sequence, like what is it telling us about him? Is it telling us that he's this great bridger of divides, or is he kind of a privileged man-child who is overly idealistic and views the world in very simple ways? What's the point that's being made here? That's just really stuck out to me. And it's also another example of missing conflict, right? Where there's no real adversity to overcome. He just walks in, swoops in, does his thing, leaves. And then maybe the point is that he believes he fixed it, but then he didn't. But the movie doesn't show this either. And maybe it's supposed to be so obvious that we're just supposed to conclude that. I don't know. I'm just saying it's just an example of how the storytelling in this works.
You know what it is? I think this film is more so of a film where its concentration is just on backstories for, like, for example, iconic music videos and, like I said, moments, rather than a film that's concentrating on other aspects such as the resolution or the solving problems and conflicts and stuff like that. I think their main goal was, number one, let's do the legend approach, just, show his legacy, but not in a way that's kind of like going into the nitty gritty and, you know what I'm saying, and showing worldly issues. It's just a film pretty much that's just revolved around Michael and his iconic moments and the backstories to, like I said, iconic music videos like Bad, Beat It, etc. So yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. I think that was intentional. I just think they just said, okay, let's just kind of give them, it's like journalism. Those celebrity journalists that kind of like give you the inside scoop on what's going on in celebrities' lives and stuff like that. I felt like it was more so that rather than let's give you an actual biopic and go in telling you the ins and outs and the exploration of his psyche. I don't think it was that at all. I think it was mainly just, we're just going to tell you the truth behind the gossip.
Yeah, I guess. I think this definitely lives from just name checking the milestones. If you are a Michael Jackson fan and you like about how he had gang members in his music video to build bridges, you want to see that happen, and you do get that, right? But it's like, is it a story? I do think you need to take a movie kind of on the terms it offers, but it's more like the scene feels like it's trying to say something, but it doesn't in the end, because it doesn't quite actually reach the statement, right? Like, we just see him do this thing, and then we cut away before it finishes, right? Before the result happens. That just really stuck out to me. It's just one in a row of several where he just gets what he wants instantly and everybody just falls in line. That kind of just rubbed me the wrong way because that's what makes it feel fake. And when it feels fake, the whole thing just feels less compelling to me. And maybe that's kind of my reaction as somebody who did not care about the reenactments of the music videos. And maybe if I was there for that, maybe it wouldn't bother me so much. But just as somebody who just wants to see the story, it feels like the movie is lying to me about what happened and about what kind of person Michael Jackson was.
But you know the scene of him getting the monkey, didn't that for you give you any sort of inclination or justification as to why they've gone with the "I'm Michael, I get whatever I want" approach?
I totally believe that Michael gets what he wants, right? But as in, if he wants a monkey, he gets a monkey, and there's nobody who can stop him. His entire family is against it, and they kind of just smile through it, right? Because at this point, they can't say no to him anymore because they need him that much. And I think that scene worked because that explains why he always gets his way. But there are other factors here where it feels like other situations where it feels like that shouldn't work. So the thing with the gang members is one of them. The music executives are another. It feels like he should eventually run into a limitation. And then because he never really grew up, he can't handle it or something like that. It just seems like there's a difference between those two. Like within his own personal life, when it's just about throwing money at stuff, he gets what he wants. Right? If he wants a giraffe, he gets a giraffe, right?
Yeah.
And nobody in that sense to tell him no, but there's an entire world out there and he can't buy everybody. It's the thing. You mentioned the thing about, what was it, like his personality, his psychology.
Yeah.
I think that is actually a part that I think works better than people give it credit for. Because if you think this is just like a whitewashing exercise to make him appear like a flawless genius, there are several sequences in this where his psychology is quite broken, right? And there's a few of them, like the thing where he buys the monkey, and at some point he says to somebody, I forget who it is, where he says, I have so many pets because I have no friends, or because they're never going to abandon me, or something like that. And like there are certain lines and sequences throughout this movie where we see just how broken he is in terms of his psychology and in terms of how arrested his development is, that mentally he's still a child even when he's an adult, and how he copes with this by just throwing money at things and by surrounding himself with animals that can't reject him. This fixation on the Peter Pan story, which is about a boy who never grows up and has magical adventures forever in a dream world, that all kind of ties together. And this is kind of the part where I don't know how real this is. What part of this is whitewashing him versus this is just how he was, and that kind of explains why he is the way he is. And then another aspect to this is like how abusive the family was, the father was. We get multiple like spanking and domestic violence scenes, which from what I've read don't play what actually happened significantly, like the degree of torture and abuse that the entire family was subjected to, not just Michael, but everybody at the hands of the father, seems to have been much more extreme than what we see in this movie. But like it's there. Right. And it's certainly there to show when he gets like plastic surgery because his father keeps criticizing how big his nose is and he has to be perfect and all of that. It seems to me like that is showing something pretty ambivalent, I would say. And I feel like if this was just like a whitewashing exercise by the family, that wouldn't be there, or there would be much less of it, or it would be much more subdued, it feels like to me.
But I think that's something which had to be put in there, because if you take that out, what else is there to talk about that kind of brings, like you say, challenges in Michael's life to kind of like take away from Michael being perfect, even though perfection was a huge theme in this film. And I feel like perfection was definitely something which I said, you know what, their attempt on this was good, because you definitely see the knock-on effect on them trying to kind of like reach the pursuit of greatness. For me, that was a good theme that they managed to explore. Just in terms of the point that you made, I think that it had to be included there, because like you said, it's such a I think that's what most people know about Michael. Of course they know other stuff about Michael.
I think you're right that a lot of the stuff is just so well known that it would really stick out if it was completely removed.
Yes, yeah.
Even I know about the child abuse that he suffered at the hands of his father, right? I was talking to family about this, about having seen the movie, and they said, yeah, if you were watching TV in the 70s, like in the 80s, 90s specifically, you knew about this stuff. This is stuff everybody knows, and so it has to be in there. But it could be a version where the father just beats Michael, and that leaves a scar, right? Like it did not have to be quite so elaborate. I just think it seems to me a bit like the people who are calling this essentially propaganda, because like I was surprised to hear that this is the first biopic about Michael Jackson. There seems to be a TV movie from like the 90s or something like that, but there has not been, like, it seems, the definitive treatment of Michael Jackson's life on film.
I think that's legal reasons.
That's part of it, but it seems to me like if you are the owner of the Jackson estate, you want that to be out there, right? And you want it to be on your terms, and you want it to make it easy to be a Michael Jackson fan again. And like especially get Gen Z and younger into the music again. You know what I mean? And like anybody who's too young to have experienced him live, you want to create a whole new generation of Michael Jackson fans, right? And it seems to me like it's a little bit ambivalent for that to just write off the entire thing as just, oh, this is just bullshit. Like this is just them lying about who he was. I don't think it's fully honest. I think that part is clear, but it's also not purely sanitized. I think it's somewhere in between.
I just wanted to see like maybe a scene of them talking to him about stuff like, why are you talking to animals? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like there was maybe a scene where the mum said, you know, he maybe should have actual friends. Cool. But I'm sure they could have, you know, gone a bit more into this. I'm sure, I mean, he had conversations with some family members in terms of why he always has a lot of toys at a grown age. And like I said, why does he talk to animals, etc., etc. Maybe this is not public knowledge, as in not public knowledge, but maybe, you know, the family just didn't share that part of his, you know, that part of his story. Cool. But if they did, maybe you should have just included one scene of a conversation between Michael, I don't know, his mom or one of his brothers or something, just to give us a bit more something that we didn't know in terms of why he does what he does, talking to animals and playing with so much toys at a big age. I don't have an issue with it. I'm saying I'm gonna get a Beyblade soon, you know what I'm saying? And I'm gonna be nearly 30. So I do not have an issue with grown men having toys. I'm just saying. I wanted to know his reasons. Like, what was it? Was it a thing? Because at first I thought maybe it was a thing where, you know, it was a lost childhood type of theme where, because, you know, he didn't really have a childhood when he was young. So the toys and speaking to animals and stuff, these are like children traits. I said, okay, maybe it's a portrayal of just, you know, the lost childhood type of theme. But that's just me assuming. I wanted some sort of confirmation that what I was thinking was the truth, but I didn't get that.
And it does seem to be an expression of his psychology, about he never quite grew up and he never quite left behind those experiences from his early years. Again, I don't know all the biographical facts about this, but like at least on the surface, it seems to be all pretty accurate in the sense that stuff like this happened. But it's all about what else do you show and where do you put the spotlight. And here, like especially like the scenes where he's really into children is, in hindsight, if you know what happened after the events of this movie, is pretty creepy. And I think without the second movie, if that even is going to happen, it's impossible to know the intention. Like, is this foreshadowing where this positive impulse turns into something much more sinister? Or is this an act of whitewashing, where he was always a predator and this is portraying events in a way to kind of hide that or explain it away? I don't think just based on what's in the movie, I think it's ambivalent and it's not really possible to tell which is which. I think there's also other aspects here where he constantly keeps talking about family, right? Where there's certainly like the family is an ever-present shadow over his life, right? But there's also mention of family, like for instance, when he signs with a record label, they keep talking about how their family. He says, I already got a family, I need a lawyer, which is a cool line, but it also kind of highlights this idea of family is something that's broken for him. Like that is something that keeps coming up in his life, but that is not really working. Like it's not what it's supposed to be for him. So I think that's in there too.
That's definitely in there too. Yeah, I don't really have much to say on that, but yeah, you're right. That is definitely in.
And there's like at least 3 instances where people try to be his family and he rejects it because of what he believes family to be or what he knows family to be.
I think that just comes from, because a lot of the times the people are trying to be his family, they're more, you know, vultures rather than showing genuine love, because it's just like business label people.
But also nobody tries to exploit him at any point. He's not made to sign, like one thing you see sometimes with actors or musicians who are very successful at a very young age is that they get shoehorned into essentially signing their rights away because they don't know any better and because they don't know how big they're going to be. Right? Like that is a really recurring thing where companies screw over talented young people just on the off chance they make it big, and when they make it big, they take everything they can get. You get this in actors, you can get this in artists, you can get this in musicians all over the place, and that does not happen here. He does not make those kinds of mistakes, and there's nobody predatory that tries to get to him. And so when they say, "Oh, we are all one big happy family here," we're not really being shown very much to show why this is a lie, and this is why they're kind of just trying to exploit him. Doesn't really happen in this movie.
I got a vibe that they were scared to exploit him because he was just too big and they didn't want to lose out on anything. Because a lot of the times they were like, not even a lot of times, but there was a line one of the music business guys said.
The Motown guy basically says, yes, I want to make money off Michael, but he's going to make much more in the process. I recognize his genius and I want to enable him, and I want my piece. Right. And that's going to be big enough. And that is kind of the first time this happens, and it happens at least two more times.
He said, yeah, oh yeah, and he said something here, we're here for you. We've always wanted you to go single, kind of like separate yourselves from the brother. But he was just reiterating the fact that, listen, this is your train. We just want to get on it. So it's not necessary that they were trying to, you know what I'm saying? So they know that he's the boss. So it's like, I was kind of getting the vibe, like already, I think one, like his approach when he got with, I forgot what meeting it was, but the scene where he said, I already got a family. No, you're not my family. I already got a family. That scene there, obviously, that told me, okay, he's a boss. He's someone not to be played with. But even before that, you still got the vibe where he's just too big. You can't really trick him. A lot of the times, a lot of these vultures would trick a lot of these artists when they're at the potential stage. Whereas Michael, he's already meeting them where he's like number one around the whole world. So that's what I was getting the vibe, was like, this guy can't be tricked or played with, but we do want a piece of it.
But not when he signs with Motown at age 10. Like, if you're going to exploit him, it's going to be there. 10 plus years later, when he's already big, yeah, he's in a stronger position and he's learned some things. But the 10-year-old that signs with Motown, that guy doesn't know anything.
To be fair, his dad was in control though.
Yeah, but he doesn't strike me as that great an agent.
Not great of an agent, but because a lot of the business went through him. Like he said, there's many times where the dad reiterates, he says, I control your decisions. I'm the one who decides. So when he's 10, he doesn't really have an opportunity to be taken advantage of because his dad is the guy that they're talking to.
Yeah, but it's not like people try and then the dad gets in the way because he knows their game. That doesn't happen. Like, in fact, the dad is in the way in that scene where the Motown, I don't know, executive just shows Michael how the switchboard works. There's nothing sinister going on there, like, that I picked up on. Like, he seems to be genuinely happy to have found this genius and to nurture that genius and make a bunch of money in the process, but by enabling Michael to have this career.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on anything predatory in that moment. And in fact, the father kind of stands in the way of that, right? And he's constantly reining in Michael because he wants the Jackson 5 to succeed. And he doesn't want Michael to break from the pack too much. That's like a recurring thing. We're getting on in time a little bit, so we do, I think, should talk about the whole thing about the child abuse and about how that's not in this movie at all. This ends with the Bad Tour, right? Like in 1988, which is essentially his victory moment where he has finally left the family behind, right? And he's finally fully realized, and he's now who he is. Like, he is now the Michael Jackson you picture in your head, when before he was kind of still becoming that person. As a capstone to a character arc, I think that scene works quite well. But this happened, I think, the abuse allegations started coming out in 93, as far as I know, and they had been going on for years. So by 1988, it seems to me like that would have already started. But what we see in the movie is that every time he has an interaction with children, he's genuinely caring about them. Like, he cares about them. He wants them to do well. He enjoys being around them. But there's nothing sinister in that sense going on. And I'm not sure that it should have at this point, right? So all the nasty stuff, all the public stuff would happen after 1988 from what I know. But it seems to me like it would have started by this point, at least in some way. And that is missing entirely from the movie. That has been heavily criticized about this movie.
How would they have shown that though? Because it's more so he says, she says. Unless it could have been a thing where they showed it through like news reports and stuff like that, but news reports came out in 2000s.
Yeah, so it would not have been public, it would have been private. Again, I don't know the history well enough to know what exactly was happening by 1988, but you could have seen the abuse going on in private, but it hasn't become public yet.
But that's the thing though, it wasn't fact. So if they did include that, then it's like, well, we don't really know if this is true or not. Why should we include it, or how can we include it?
As a storyteller in a biopic, you kind of have to pick a side. You kind of have to decide what the true events were and then depict those. And the movie basically takes the stance that nothing happened up until 1988.
I hear you, Daniel, but I think that one's a bit sticky still, because it's like, if it was a film later on, like I said, in the early 2000s, in the 2000s era, then I definitely do think they should mention like news reports and what's kind of like going on in the public. There should be a portrayal of public opinion when it comes to the whole child abuse allegations, right? But in terms of showing something which there's no public knowledge of and there's no inside scoop, because I'm sure the Jackson family saying, no, this didn't happen. So if you've got the Jackson family saying, no, this didn't happen on one side, and then you've got the people saying, okay, this did happen, then it's like, I feel like as a writer, you shouldn't be the one to make a decision. And especially a decision where you could be saying this, it actually happened. Because by the way, I don't know if this is true or not. It doesn't matter if he's Michael Jackson, it doesn't matter how big someone is. If it's the thing where you're unfortunately doing child abuse and you want to do a biopic, then that should be included. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah, it is a little bit like making a biopic about Harvey Weinstein and only show the parts where he makes blockbuster after blockbuster and basically single-handedly runs Hollywood into its golden age.
But that's different though, because he got convicted.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was building up to. Again, I'm not a Michael Jackson fan. I don't have a stake in this. And people seem to feel very strongly about this either way. What I can tell is that his victims had their day in court and nothing stuck. Like, he was acquitted on all counts. There were settlements, fairly substantial ones, and that's it. There's circumstantial evidence, and everybody has their favorite piece of evidence that shows their preferred conclusion. But a government that brought down Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and Epstein and all the others couldn't bring down Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? It's a bit strange.
And I definitely get what you're saying. I'm not here trying to say Michael Jackson didn't commit abuse. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying all of those events that you just mentioned, that happened in the 2000s. So you should show that if there's going to be a second Michael movie, you should show the settlements being given out. You should show all of that in the second film. However, with this film, you can't really show him committing abuse because we have no details of nothing. All we have is he say, she say, in the 2000s, and obviously we have settlements being given in 2000s
from the 90s onwards. I think the public allegation started in 93 as far as I know. But also, you're right that any events you do depict in this are made up because there's no evidence of specific events happening before 88, right? As far as I know, right? So I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, but if there was actual, the timeline stopped at 88, and then it started at 90. Okay, because I was gonna say, if people were speaking about this publicly in the 80s, then they should have shown that with obviously Michael's reaction 100%. But because it started in the 90s, then it's like, the timeline for this film finished at 88. So unfortunately for me, it's like, you can't really show that because we don't know the truth. But definitely, if there's a second film, then you need to show all of that because we already know this. So for you not to include this is like, okay, now we know that this has been, like you say, whitewashed because we've seen all of this. You know what I'm saying? We know all of this. So for you not to include it, then I don't think there's any point of them creating the second film because I don't think they're going to include none of that. They might include like a small scene here where he's being accused and then we might see his reaction. But I still don't think they're even going to show that, to be fair.
But he did have like 10-year-olds living with him on his ranch and that sort of thing. Like, that part is fact. The question is just what happened behind closed doors, right?
Yeah.
And that part is basically like there's no strong like legal evidence and nothing could be proven in a court of law is the thing. And so what do you depict in a biopic like this, right? There's also another aspect to this is that part of the settlement for one of the victims, at least one of the victims, there's one person who keeps getting quoted in these kinds of arguments, is that as part of his settlement, there was a stipulation that the Jackson estate could not profit from that story. And that means if you make a movie about Michael Jackson's life, you cannot legally depict it because otherwise you're in breach of the settlement from like the 90s. Again, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care about whether or not he really did this. I do care that the truth is known, but I don't really see the path here where you go into this in good faith and you want to show it as it really happened. But then there's this legal requirement that means you can't show it. Like regardless of whether or not it happened, like that legal agreement is real. And that is why this movie was reshot, because apparently they didn't check with the lawyers before they shot this. And there was stuff in this related to that. And then the lawyer said, you have to take it out because otherwise we get sued and this gets really expensive. And so that is why this movie was delayed. And it's a little bit weird that you can go and like spend $200 million on making a biopic and you don't run it past the lawyers first before you start shooting. It's a little bit weird, especially with a case like this that everybody knows about. Like if I'm a director or like a producer and I make a Michael Jackson biopic, day one, I'm talking to the lawyers, okay, what can and can't we say? You know what I mean? Like, that's a bit weird that this apparently didn't happen in that sequence. But also, like, even if somebody did want to show it, they couldn't, is the thing.
But I think they could kind of go around that because wasn't there a few cases?
It seems to me like if you show one case, you kind of imply it about all of them. Would be my suspicion.
I see.
I don't know. I have no idea what the exact details are. I'm just saying the complaint that it's not included in this movie. And I think the 88 cutoff is deliberate because that's before anything public came out. And so you can leave it out and leave the story intact, right? Whether you should or could ethically is a different story. But like just from these are the historical events. If you stop at 88, you leave all that stuff outside, right? And there's no guarantee that there's going to be a sequel. There might not be one.
I don't think there will be.
Yeah, it's a little bit like why would you?
Yeah, literally.
Like anybody who wants to like Michael Jackson gets exactly what they want from this movie, and then you just invite disaster by
Yeah.
wading into the dark, like the darker later half of his life, right? Just purely from a strategic standpoint, if you're a movie studio and you want to make two Michael Jackson movies, aren't you setting yourself up for disaster with the second one?
Literally.
And can you just not make the second one?
I don't think his family would stamp on that either.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
You know what I'm saying? Legally, it's gonna be literally it's gonna be war. Gonna have to go
Yeah.
through the public, they're gonna have to go through the family, it's gonna be war. Lawyers, yeah, it seems like they're gonna be putting more money out than getting more money in with that uphill battle. So yeah, no man, I just don't it just won't make sense. But knowing these production companies, they do things where it's like, why the hell would you do that? So I won't be surprised, if they did release a sequel.
Maybe. And again, I don't care either way, right? Like the truth should come out, but it's like I don't like practically I don't see a way how this could have been any different.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that is the part, like one of the things I wanted to bring up is this is one of the biggest Rotten Tomato splits I've ever seen. As of recording, it's got 38% with reviewers and 97% with audiences. That means it's not just a crowd pleaser, but depending on how you approach this movie, you get very different results. You get a very different experience. And like 97 is insane. Like that's like it's not that good. I think this works entirely as a concert movie, and that is why people like it. Like people who go to see it want to see Michael Jackson do Michael Jackson things, and the movie gives it to them in spades, and they walk away liking it, and so they give it a thumbs up. And the critics are more likely to insist on talking about the abuse and the darker stuff, and they don't get that. And in addition to that, it's just not a very well constructed story, I don't think, outside of the music sequences. Like we talked about, and we went through all the ways in which the storytelling isn't that great. But I walked into this kind of fully expecting to dissent from the critics, because I usually do, and because like I've just seen this before, where a good movie gets trashed by critics because it doesn't do what they want politically, right? September 5, best movie of the year, as far as I was concerned, completely trashed by a lot of people, because of its politics, because of how it relates to real world events, especially as they were happening in early 2025 with the Gaza war. And I think that's just doing the movie dirty, because that's not what the movie is about. But critics have a tendency to hijack their reviews or to soapbox about whatever it is they want to talk about, and the movie is just an excuse to talk about whatever they want to talk about. And I was kind of ready for this to be one of those, right? They said, oh, you would just want this to be all about the abuse, but you are ignoring why this movie otherwise works. Like I was ready to kind of go to battle with those kinds of critics, and I kind of see their point of view. Like it's not that great a movie, and I see how audiences don't care about character arcs and whatever. And like the music scenes made me feel good as well, right? As a non-fan, and I imagine it's magical if you are a diehard Michael Jackson fan, right? Seeing all of those different like musical numbers and performances put to screen, I understand why people like it so much. But 97% is pretty insane.
I was going to bring up the Elvis Presley film, because even in the Elvis Presley movie, they didn't bring up certain accusations about him either. And I'm wondering if this received the same energy, if that film received the same energy that Michael has received. Because obviously a lot of people, I'm assuming, are talking about, like you mentioned, I think you mentioned that they mentioned a lot of the times that they didn't mention nothing about the abuse, and rightfully so. But I don't remember the same public opinion when it comes or reaction when it comes to the Elvis Presley movie. I think they showed his abuse on drugs, but I'm sure there was a few more accusations on Elvis's name that wasn't shown in the film. So I'm just trying to remember if that was the audience's same reaction.
I didn't see that one, and I don't know Elvis Presley's life to that detail, but there seems to be a pattern here where these biopics tend to reinforce kind of the official story in a way, and the negative parts or the dark parts or the tragic parts are kind of maybe they're in the fringes or they're not there at all. And it seems to me like these movies tend to do well because there's a lot of people out there who just want the feel-good story. And like if you're talking about a real person, it seems to me like you need to take the good with the bad. Like I find it very easy to separate art from artist. I can enjoy somebody's work while at the same time being very honest and very scathing about what kind of person they were. And I don't feel like there's a contradiction there. So if I was a Michael Jackson fan, I could say he made some incredible music and he should have gone to prison for what I believe he did. You know what I mean? Like I have no problem splitting the difference. When a movie starts lying, that's when I'm kind of off the train. Like that's where I say, no, you shouldn't be doing this.
But yeah, that was literally my point was going to be as well, that I don't think maybe there has been a biopic, but I just haven't seen one where, of course, they can't show the full truth, but they're not showing the dark sides of that truth also, where everything mainly just we're just seeing that person in like an angelic light, and they're not showing the full truth. So that's why I do think we shouldn't really expect the full truth a lot of these biopics, because I don't think there's going to be someone that's going to be, I wouldn't say bold enough, I don't think that's the right word to use, but someone that will come out and give a green light to the dark sides, like the proper dark sides of his life, where he's still ashamed of. So, or he or she's still ashamed of. So I think when it comes to, just that subject matter, I think this is what we should kind of like expect when it comes to biopics. We're not gonna don't expect to see the full truth, especially when it comes to the more heinous and darker stuff.
I think you probably need 100 or 200 years to pass.
Yeah.
Like, no, like everybody who was in any way related to this needs to be long dead, and then you can take whatever stance you want.
Yeah.
Like when Ridley Scott made a Napoleon biopic 2 years ago, that was not a popular take on who Napoleon was, and it wasn't apparently all that factual because it's a 300-year-old story. Nobody owns it in that sense, right? Like it kind of becomes just part of human history. And maybe in 200 years there will be a Michael Jackson biopic that just has sufficient distance that nobody feels touchy about it. It's a bit like saying like somebody in the 1700s was an awful person while doing some great things. Nobody balks at that if you say that, right? But like Michael Jackson, he's been dead for like 20 years. His children are alive. His family is alive. People who grew up on his music are alive today. It just cuts too close to home, I think. Under those circumstances, you can't expect an honest story. Like it has to be calculated. The Smashing Machine last year seemed to be much more honest about that. And we had some reservations about that when we talked about that, but that's still like a person who's still alive, but it's about kind of a person who falls really hard after losing for the first time and descends into like drug abuse and depression and self-destructive behavior, and then claws his way out again and then wins in the end. And all of that seems to be pretty historical, but because it's not a huge story in the sense of somebody that everybody knows and that everybody feels strongly about, it's easier to at least, and I don't think that movie was completely honest either, that if you go back to our review of that, we still have some reservations, especially because the guy shows up in the end and just gives up a creepy vibe. And we said at the time, like, something's off about this. But that is the kind of thing where you can tell a more nuanced story if people are not as invested, because it's a smaller, more niche story that not as many people care about as much. But Michael Jackson, everybody cares. It's a bit like making a Star Wars movie. Like, everybody cares so much that you just can't just make a movie and have it sink or swim on its own merits. It has to be micromanaged in every detail. And I think a Michael Jackson biopic is similar, where there's so much scrutiny on it and everybody has such strong opinions that it's impossible to just tell the story as it happened, in addition to the difficulties of what even did happen.
Yeah. And I feel like that's for most people in history. Like people like, for example, Mahatma Gandhi, Winston Churchill. But society has an agreement that this person is a good person, then you're not going to receive the full truth. Because I even remember back in my history lessons, what we learned about people like Mahatma Gandhi and Winston Churchill, they were portrayed as godlike in a way where they had no sin. Like they walked this earth with no sin. But then obviously when you do more research, when you kind of go behind the scenes and do more research on your own, then you're like, hold on, how come you guys didn't teach us this part? How come you didn't tell us about this part? So, like I said, it's one of them ones where if society views this person as, like I said, like an angel, or they're represented as someone that's good in society, they're just going to kind of like do anything that they can to suppress the full truth.
There's an opinion you're allowed to have. And you can't just make a $200 million movie that just takes a contrarian take. It just doesn't work, right? It's always going to be co-opted and constrained by what's possible. All right, shall we wrap it up?
Okay, so I still, I'm going to keep my stance on this being a very fun movie. It delivers when it comes to performances. It delivers when it comes to making you feel jiggy. It delivers when it comes to delivering that's nostalgia. That being said, I do agree with a lot of the things that Daniel said. And I do still think that the story lacks, because all in all is because the full truth, it just wasn't shown for me personally. So like I said, I wanted to see a bit more when it comes to certain subject matters, but yeah, when it comes to these type of biopics, you're not gonna kind of like receive the full truth. I just wanted a bit more when it comes to his psyche, mainly for me personally. But that being said, like I say, it's a fun movie. So I'm gonna give this one it's touching a 7. I can't give it a 6. So I'm just going to give it a 7. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, mainly because of the performances and the nostalgia. So I would say it's a 7.
Yeah, so I think this works really well as a jukebox musical and as a concert movie. The way the music is is realized, it made me swing a little bit in my chair. That is difficult to do. Outside of that, it's much more mixed. So just leaving aside of what this should have been, as a story, it's not told that well. It's very hand-wavy in a lot of aspects. It lacks conflict. It lacks a story that's all that interesting, because you're basically watching somebody succeed because he's just that awesome for 2 hours. And that is just not a very compelling viewing experiences. And the conflict that is in here feels very by the numbers, and you kind of just wait for it to be over, and then kind of the movie kind of moves on. It really depends on how much you care about the music. And if the story is more important than the music, which is the case for me, it's not that great. So that's a 5 out of 9.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode.
So if you've come this far and you like what we do, please tell a friend. And if you hate what we do, please tell an enemy.
All right, guys. We will catch you next time. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.